absolutely worth serving the SMB customer. One of the amazing things about serving small businesses is you never run out of customers to engage with. 80% plus of them want to have AI, but what is it that they want to have? Because AI is a technology, AI is an enabler, AI is a way to solve a problem. When you serve SMBs, it's not a question, it's not an if, it is the only way to do so. When you don't start with that mindset, it's really hard to then build it in because it takes time. No one person, for the most part, is going to break a company. What's the fear of trying something, learning, failing? As long as you're curious and willing to learn, I think that's all that matters.
Irana Wasti, former Chief Product Officer at Bill.com. Welcome to Change Order.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, excited to have you. When you and I first had our initial intro conversation, we talked a little bit about customer obsession. And I think customer obsession is something that's pretty squishy these days. How do you think about customer obsession and implementing it in your teams?
Yeah, well, customer obsession is what helped me build the career that I've had and helped me focus my career. So I've dedicated my entire career in serving SMBs. And what got me started in serving SMBs is actually visiting a customer. I started my career at Intuit, a company that's very customer obsessed and teaches you how to be customer obsessed. And so one of the first things you do is you learn how to talk to your customer. And when you visit a customer like a small business around your neighborhood, around your community, you learn their story, their history, what drives them. It's really hard then not to be obsessed about serving them well, serving them at scale. So for me, that customer obsession got triggered and then persisted throughout my career simply by getting to know who your customer is, what drives them, and how you can help them. And so that's something I try to instill in all the teams that I've been with literally around the world, is to make sure we know who we serve. Because I know every single person, once they meet a couple of their local customers, especially those SMB customers, it's really hard to go back and not think about how you're solving for that shop, for that customer, for that individual. So that's kind of where my customer obsession starts, is actually knowing who your customers are, which is kind of interesting in SMB world, because at SMB, you have to serve them at scale. There are millions of them around the world, but yet it's the individual ones that stay with you, that drive you, that motivate you. So that's how I sort of help myself and my team get to that customer obsession, customer love.
I've read the book $1 Trillion Coach, which is about Bill Campbell, who played a role in Intuit. And there was also a lot of reading I've done around Scott Cook and the culture he's built over at Intuit. Shockingly, maybe to many, the Intuit Mafia is very, very strong and has started a lot of companies, taken over leadership roles at many companies. What was it about the culture there? How did they actually get people to be customer obsessed, especially when you were dealing with so many different types of SMBs?
Yeah, it is really impressive, and it is really part of their DNA, especially if you're in the product management, product marketing, engineering disciplines. It's part of how you do work. There's no other way you can do work, convey your point, convince anyone of anything if it's not backed by customer, if it's not customer backed, if it didn't have any kind of that customer engagement on that thought process that Intuit teaches you of how to engage with the customer, come up with ideas, review those ideas back with the customers, validate, and so on. Like Intuit truly invests into you as an individual employee there to make sure you have the tools to engage with your customers, to then brainstorm, ideate, deliver solutions. It's just part of the DNA. It's part of how every job is done. And so coming in there as a product manager, it's something you just get. It gets so ingrained in your system. Then to this day, I use their methods. Like, for example, one of the things they have is this thing called Follow Me Home, right? It's a simple thing about following your customer, basically going into your customer's shop, not to interview them, not to survey them, but observe them do their job. And then take notes from that, to have mental notes, have ideas, use those ideas to come back, brainstorm what you learn and how you can solve for what you saw the customer do, and then follow up with the customer, see if this could be helpful for them, and so on. But Follow Me Home started with Scott Cook. It literally meant he was following customers home who were buying shrink rack software to see how they install and use it, right? And it's still a methodology that's used and it's still called that. And it's so powerful. And I had the chance to do it around the world and meet customers and literally follow customers home around the world. And it's one of the most powerful tools I've learned from Intuit.
Do you find shadowing or customer interviews then to be more impactful for your research?
I think it depends what you're trying to learn. If you have a hypothesis and you want to get more feedback on how to proceed with that hypothesis, I think interviewing is great. I think if you are a step before hypothesis and you're trying to think bigger, either building a strategy or thinking of adjacencies or thinking of expanding what it is your product does, I think follow me homes are a lot more open-ended than an interview.
I like that. One thing I've been struggling with is that VCs are so enamored right now with vertical AI that it feels like they're investing in every PM that walks out of Stripe or, a big company with an idea that sounds pretty good. But when you dig in a little bit more, they haven't really had that many customer conversations. If you were on our side of the table, what would you want to see? How many interviews, how many conversations, would you feel comfortable to want to write a check, even as an angel investor?
Yeah, I think for me, the key question is going to be is what problem are you solving? Because we do survey customers, right? We do, and again, survey primarily SMBs, and we do get feedback that 80% plus of them want to have AI. But what is it that they want to have? What is it that they think when they say, yes, we want AI in our tech solutions? What is it that they actually want, right? Like, what is in their mind and understanding of what is it that AI gives them, right? To me, it's all about, well, what is it? What is the solution? What problem you're solving? And then the fact that you can solve it better, faster, more intuitive, because of him backed by AI, I think that's where that's what's brilliant. So for me, the key question would be is what problem are you solving? Because AI is a technology, AI is an enabler, AI is a way to solve a problem. It's not the problem, nor is it necessarily the one and only solution. It empowers the solution. So that would be the question that I would ask from your side of the table.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's very hard because I feel like some things are good theoretical problems that people want to go and solve, but to actually solve the problem and then to also get distribution, especially in SMB land, can be incredibly challenging.
Mm-hmm. And again, the way you're going to get that distribution is by showing how your solution solves something very important for that SMB.
Totally.
And solves it in the most intuitive way, because one of the challenges is for SMBs is they don't have the time. They don't have the expertise or the time. And so if you have the time, you can gain the expertise, but you have neither. It's really important that the solution is that much more intuitive in order to get adopted.
Totally. It's got to stand out. The time to value must be very, very fast.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about your background a little bit. You immigrated to the U.S., I think, when you were 14 from Uzbekistan. There are a number of people that had an impact on your life, your mom, your grandmother, your great-grandmother. What are some of the values that they instilled in you at a young age that's impacted your career?
I was lucky enough that I've had quite relatively young family, and so I had a chance to basically live with my mom, my grandma, my great-grandma, my dad, my grandfather, my great-grandfather as well. And one of the key things I learned from them is that pretty much everything is possible. There was never any limits, regardless where we were or what the situations were. So all of the women in my family have a PhD, for example, and worked full time while raising a family in different and difficult circumstances. My family immigrated to U.S. and retrained themselves to find jobs here in order to provide for a better life for my sister and I and help us get started. I used their sort of advice that nothing is impossible as I approached my career and my life. And so I found myself starting HBS at 6 months pregnant with our first child, and that seemed totally doable and fine. And so it's that sort of that attitude of like everything is possible, right? If my mom and my grandma could immigrate and my great grandma could immigrate to a new country and restart their life in their 30s, 50s, and so on, it felt like everything, like nothing should be limiting. Like everything can be worked through. And that's kind of what I keep carrying forward with me and now to my children and so on.
That's amazing. It's probably safe to say you had a very different MBA experience than
I
many.
was a very different MBA student. And so my husband was also at HBS with me, and we set the HBS record. We were their first couple in school to have a child.
Wow.
And so they were actually, talk about sort of persevering, but at the same time, an environment being open to having you around. They've actually went above and beyond in making sure that we can succeed at school. And the professors were amazing. The professors would catch us up on anything we missed during, when the baby was being born. And it was just a very welcoming environment, and we kind of worked through it together.
That's incredible. So what did you want to get out of your MBA, and what did you end up getting out of your MBA?
So look, I went into MBA from having a computer science degree and working as an engineer at IBM. I always knew I wanted to get into business. And so the MBA for me was that opening, right? It was that opportunity to go in and learn certain disciplines in business and just really be surrounded by a different mindset. I went to college as my undergrad for computer science. I had a very different set of classes. And so for me, MBA was sort of my opening into the more of a business side of the world. And obviously, you learn a lot, and the network was the other thing that was important for us to get out. In some ways, having a baby in business school, which while unusual, it actually helped us build much stronger and deeper bonds with people because we were able to go sort of spend more deeper time with people versus going broader. And it was a fantastic experience.
Well, a lot of people, I feel like they go to HBS, they network a ton, they meet a lot of great people, they go into investing, consulting, enterprise software. You decided to go into SMB land. What made you want to go and serve SMBs?
So what actually started is I wanted to go into product management. The reason I wanted to go into product management is because I always had this ambition, desire. I always said I want to be a CEO of an international tech company, and product management seemed like a good place to start. So I actually wanted to go into product management, and the job that I ended up going to was with Intuit. That's when I got hooked on serving SMBs. Because when you go into Intuit as a product manager, because you know you're going to learn a lot, the company has a fantastic reputation of training and building product management discipline. For me, I walked out of Intuit completely obsessed with SMBs and sort of realizing that that's the audience I want to serve going forward.
And at this point in your career, between Bill, Intuit, GoDaddy, you've probably interacted or your products have touched tens of millions of SMBs. What's like a non-obvious insight that you feel like you've gained about SMBs and that we probably wouldn't be thinking about on the other side of the table today?
Yeah. What's interesting about SMBs, and especially when you talk to SMBs, you realize, like, why does any small business exist? Because somebody had a passion to do something, and they saw a need to solve some unique problem in their community that they live in. And so every small business you meet will tell you what's unique about them, why they're unique, why their challenges are unique, and why they need your help. When you then step back, you realize that there's so much more commonality across SMBs worldwide. And so that in order to serve them at scale, which is what you have to do as a business, you can find so much commonalities and you can provide more horizontal solutions. So then to the small business might look that you're solving their specific need. But in reality, in the background, you know that your solution scales across many, many types of small businesses or around the world. Like look at GoDaddy, for example. When I joined GoDaddy, we were operating in US only. And once you create a platform that can scale around the world, you unleash a lot of new opportunities, and you have to serve those small businesses locally and sort of in a way that makes sense for wherever they are in the world, but you have to still be able to do it at scale. So I think that horizontal component is what it will help the businesses scale. And the scaling is, like I said, the only way I think you can serve small businesses.
So let's unpack that a little bit. I think there's a lot of noise around vertical SaaS in the advantages around being able to not only build product that might be a little bit more specific to the workflow of a specific industry, but also there's the marketing component and speaking the language. How did you try to address that throughout the course of your career? And how do you think about the differences between vertical and horizontal?
So I think the way I would think about it is I would say, look for as many. So if you think of your product as a platform, right, that offers different solutions and your customers can explore them as they go, think of how many layers can you build horizontally before you have to create some kind of a local customizable sort of experiences on top. And then how do you create those horizontal layers in a way that you enable them to be customizable, whether it's for geography or vertical, right? Because again, it's not just the vertical, it's also the geographies that matter, right? There's a big world out there. So how do you create those layers a way that you can then easily customize? And at what point do you have to verticalize them? And again, we've had to do them. We've had tons of experience to do it, for example, geographically. And it truly, some geographies, like serving MENA, is not easy. It's a right to left geography. And so talk about customizing your solution. It's not verticalizing it, but it's still very much customizing for that market. Or verticalizing, for example, at GoDaddy, we served different types of SMBs. Some were more tech advanced and some were less tech advanced. So we needed different product offerings and different solutions. But again, in every subsegment, you still try to look for as much sort of that horizontal commonality as possible so that you're left to, so that your verticalization can scale basically as well.
So is there a place within, let's use GoDaddy as an example, the GoDaddy product and the GoDaddy marketing, where a business owner in one industry and in one country would go through a fundamentally different user journey where they come in via different marketing and landing pages and then they land in a product that's also different?
Yes. So marketing, absolutely, right? In order for us to open most of the meaningful new geographies, it was local marketing, working with local, whatever the right environment is. So from like a go-to-market marketing perspective and language, absolutely. Then from a product perspective, yeah, so we had different types of products. Again, some that serve sort of website builder product, for example, is more for a do-it-yourself type of website builder. Different hosting products are more for technically advanced SMBs. But also, for example, when we launched MENA, we had to launch it with a partner product. Because the investment to customize your own product to support right to left alphabet was too heavy of a lift and too long of a time that it made more sense to go and white label a partner product, for example. But we did that for the specific set of geographies.
Interesting. So you've been in SMB land for probably close to 15 years now. What's something that you believe that other people probably don't believe when it comes to SMBs?
This might sound very obvious, but what I believe is that it's absolutely worth serving the SMB customer. And what happens often at the companies is that unless you reach that scale where you serve SMBs at scale and you've acquired and are working with quite a lot of SMBs around the world, what the businesses tend to do is go upmarket first because there's a higher willingness to pay, it's more predictable, it's more consistent revenue, and then try to figure out how to scale back from that more mid-market up, lower enterprise solution all the way down to SMB. So for me, the most sort of both surprising and obvious thing is that it's worth serving them.
I totally agree. I mean, I grew up in a family of small business owners, and so I think it's super important. But then you come into a venture capital firm and, you look at what companies are publicly traded and how many more of them have been successful in the mid-market or the enterprise. And you kind of scratch your head about like, is this surface area or the probability of being able to be successful investing in SMBs, is it enough? Or if we look at your track record, Intuit, GoDaddy, Bill, these companies were all very early, I feel like, in the software, landscape. Is there something about their timing that made it so they were able to be successful? Or do you think that a new multi-billion-dollar SMB unicorn could be created today?
I think all the companies you named became successful at scale for different reasons. I think in GoDaddy's case, for example, they were quite early and capitalizing on the idea of, you want to have a presence online, you need a domain name and a website and so on. And they were quite early in that space. I think Bill is slightly different, and Bill has been really interesting to learn more about and be part of. because Bill's founder found a need that the SMBs have that he felt passionate about that needs to be solved, and nobody else is solving it. And so while in Bill's case, there were other GLs that have been around for so many years, including Intuit and others, he found that there is actually a need beyond the GL solution, like QuickBooks and so on, to really solve that financial operations need of small businesses, and he started a company around that. So it's not necessarily that he was first to financial operations space, like GoDaddy was first to sort of domains and websites and so on. It's just he understood the customer in a way that he realized that the solutions that are available in the market, which are very ingrained solutions, been around for a long time, they really don't solve that financial operations need, those workflows for the customer. And that's what he set out to build 18 years ago now.
Was he former Intuit also?
He was part of Intuit for a little bit, yes.
Why didn't he build it over at Intuit?
Well, I think you would have to, you would have to interview him. But he also had another company that served SMBs that got acquired by Intuit.
Got it. That makes sense. I mean, you've now worked with, as we talked about, like tens of millions of SMBs. I feel like it creates a very unique testing environment where you can go out and you can A/B test things that companies that only have 15 enterprise customers can't do. What's like been the best success or successful test for you over the course of your career with SMBs?
So for me, and by the way, you're absolutely right. I think one of the amazing things about serving small businesses is you never run out of customers to engage with or test solutions with, which I think is quite fun. For me, sort of some of the memorable successes are around ability to find the right language to speak to the SMB around in the different geographies that they are, in a way that works for them. And so for me, that experience was when I was running EMEA for GoDaddy. And part of my job was to open up a lot of new markets. And that's where you learn that opening up different markets, so for example, we launched Germany and Italy and Spain and MENA and so on, is the success is predicated on really understanding how to speak to the businesses that are there, how to influence them, how to speak the language that resonates for their for the needs that they have in that geography. And I don't just mean the language itself. I mean actually like what's the messaging that works? Because you have this global GoDaddy brand with the global GoDaddy message, but how does it actually work for specific geographies? Who influences the SMBs in that geography? So what type of solution resonates with them, even though, yes, you're still selling them the domain and the websites and so on, but how does it get represented in that market? For me, that was a really unique learning, and we were able to successfully launch a geography and get that sort of that SMB growth that we wanted in that market. That for me was sort of a fun success to look back on, because it was not one geography was the same as the other, and that was quite fascinating to learn.
I always find it interesting when I hear stories about people going to other countries to launch businesses. Our partner Ben was over in Korea helping launch Coupang back in the day. And he tells the story about how Ben's Chinese and didn't speak Korean, but was like writing the Facebook ads early on at Coupang using like Google Translate. But it just worked. When you look at your experience, how did you try to get into the cultural nuance of the local market? Was it you going around, or were you bringing people onto your team that you were really leaning into and trusting?
Both. The answer was both. I spent a lot of time going around the geographies. In fact, I always share this quick anecdote that I moved to London in the summer. By November, I ran out of pages in my passport because of how much travel I had to do to visit both local teams and also local customers and really learn the local geographies. But it was also hiring the people from each of the geographies who knew the market, who understood the customer, who really spoke the language firsthand to really help bring those markets to life. And what was interesting is before moving to London, I was a general manager at GoDaddy in US, and I was a general manager of an international business unit. And I felt very international. I was running international business unit, I had customers all over the world. I knew what I was doing, and it wasn't until moving to London and running EMEA I realized how little we know of how much we're doing internationally sitting in US. It's just so eye-opening to realize where the similarities are, but yet there's so many differences, including, for example, being in UK. I still remember there was a GoDaddy Thanksgiving campaign that said, "Don't wait in line, go online," that was sent to us in UK. And you're sitting in UK and you're thinking, well, there's no lines because there's no Thanksgiving, and it's not a line, it's a queue. Right. So just even as something as simple as
Little
that,
cultural nuances.
exactly, something as simple as that, technically in the same language, just would go nowhere. Right. So again, just really understanding the local culture. Something fun I learned about Germany is one of the advertisings we ran was on a ping pong table over a ping pong championship over Christmas. Who knew that's a thing? Apparently, it's a huge thing, and it's widely watched across Germany. And it was one of the ways we advertise. So, I mean, things like that you learn about the local culture, and again, who engages with what is absolutely fascinating.
It's interesting that you say that because I'm thinking back to the people that I've met who have worked in other countries, and they almost have this forced mentality around curiosity. Whereas sometimes when you bring executives into companies that have had the same playbook work twice in one country, they just try to like stamp it out again and again and again. Do you want to then work with people that have worked internationally before? Does that make you lean into that more? Or does it really not matter to you?
I'm not sure if it's just internationally specific, but I want people who are curious. And one of the ways you can get that curiosity satisfied is when you work across maybe different industries or you serve different needs of the customer, which then force you to go and learn whatever it is you're solving for them. So, for example, if you look across my career journey, aside from international, I've also worked at companies that serve very different needs. So at Intuit, it was about point of sale and mobile point of sale. At GoDaddy, it was about everything about getting online. At Bill, it's about financial operations and payments. And so as a jobs to be done that we solve, as the type of technology we provide or solution, they're all very different, right? The common thread is the customer, the SMB. But beyond that, it sort of forced me to go and learn each of the areas I was part of in these companies. And yes, geography obviously played another whole role in it because it forced me to learn about a lot about sort of different geographies and cultures and so on. But I don't think it just has to be tied to geography. It could be tied to something else like the jobs you solve, or even the customer you solve for, coming from enterprise to SMB, SMB to enterprise. As long as you're curious and willing to learn, I think that's all that matters.
Yeah, no, I think curiosity and it's almost like a willingness to fail at times are both two important traits when it comes to people. And when it comes to SMBs, as we talked about, you're able to experiment so much more. You mentioned you went into countries that you didn't really know a lot about in the early days. And I'm sure at this point in your career, you've run thousands of tests. Is there a test that stands out in your mind as one that was the biggest fail so far?
A few do. And I like how you framed the question because I am a big believer in testing and experimenting because it helps you be more creative and risk-taking without having sort of big bang failures, or big bang successes, I guess. But one that stands out is actually quite a funny one is when I just moved to UK. Part of my job was to run all of go-to-market. And so I built out a go-to-market team. I hired a brand leader, and we were ready to put our first marketing campaign. And now, at that time, it was my first ever advertising campaign that I've ever, worked on. And so we've hired an agency, and we designed this. We thought was the best advertising idea. It was around the Loch Ness monster, Nessie, and it was about how you don't see Nessie because she's not online. But if she was online, you could find her easier. Anyways, I thought it was brilliant. It was hilarious. It was great. And as we were about to go into production, we had to run it by corporate corporate, and we get completely vetoed because apparently there's a GoDaddy policy that says no non-humans at the time in the advertising. And so this was us mapping out all of this brilliant, my first ever brand advertising campaign that gets completely shut down, vetoed, no discussion, because I hit a guardrail that I didn't realize there was one, because it was my first one. So that didn't feel great, but it kind of forced us to really then rethink of like, okay, one, learn the guardrails, but two, really rethink then why those guardrails exist. How do you leverage them? How do you make sure that you actually use them in a way that's advantageous for opening a market? And, we went forward and ran amazing campaigns after that, but that was my very first one.
Why do you think that guardrail did exist?
Because we're not selling to Nessies, we're selling to real people. Like SMBs are real people, real businesses with their real lives, and so I think part of the guardrail was like we have to represent who we serve. It can be gimmicky, it can be funny, and we ran some funny campaigns, but it's got to be real. And so in fact, we went on, and every campaign we ran since then featured a customer.
I do feel like I remember way back in the day, GoDaddy had some really good, like, jaw-dropping viral ads.
How far back in the day are you thinking?
I'm
There's some
thinking
pretty
like
bad ones.
late 90s, early 2000s, maybe, Super Bowl ads.
Yes, that was before my time at GoDaddy. And knowing that we will never run those ads again was a big part of joining GoDaddy.
That's good. I think tapping into the customer stories is probably better than the other way around.
Yes.
But one of the ways that they certainly grew was viral advertising. And then I think with the other companies you've been at, and probably GoDaddy included, PLG has probably been a big part of that. PLG has risen up in the vocabulary of every venture capitalist, it feels like, over the last 5 to 10 years. How has your mindset shifted around PLG, and what role does it play in your day-to-day as a chief product officer?
So I agree that PLG has become sort of top of mind for a lot of folks, especially as they start getting into, as more and more people get into, whether it's SMB or consumer, prosumer, where again, you have to serve people in masses. Because basically all the concept of PLG is that your product needs to speak for itself. Your product has to sell itself, onboard itself, enable anybody to pick up and use, discover. And part of then PLG business model is the more the customer uses the product, the more they can discover more with you and do more with you and stay with you longer. And so again, in some ways, when you serve SMBs, it's not a question, it's not an if, it's it is the only way to do so, because otherwise you're never going to reach scale. But I think the challenge is that it depends where your company's starting from. And if you start with that mindset, then it's easy to scale. When you don't start with that mindset, it's really hard to then build it in, because it takes time, right? It takes time, it takes a lot of iterations, a lot of experimentation. And so the different companies I work with were at different stages of that. And whether we were building off of that foundation, taking it forward, versus having to go back to that foundation, it just creates different challenges and opportunities.
Did the growth team report into you at places like GoDaddy and Bill, or how did you guys structure what parts go into product, what parts go into marketing?
It really depended. In GoDaddy, when you think about being sort of a GM of a business unit, when you build your products, you're building them completely self-serviceable, but there was also a central growth marketing team. At Typeform, which was a startup that I worked at, I had growth, product, and marketing actually build that function, and then that had that reporting to me. At Bill, for example, growth product is something I, again, build that function for Bill, and so therefore that was reporting to me, but working tightly with growth marketing team.
I want to talk a little bit about this whole like SMB movement on Twitter. It feels like people like Cody Sanchez are getting a lot of people to drum up the let's go buy SMBs, let's go start new SMBs. It's a great business. It'll get you some cash flow. It's also very hard though in reality. If you were starting a new SMB or buying an SMB tomorrow, what are some of the initial tech decisions that you would probably make?
Yeah. By the way, one thing I have to say about SMB is, in terms of like, it's a great business model and opportunity. I think what people can't forget is that it's a passion and it's a lifestyle. Like it's just that it's unless you put all of you into it, it doesn't really exist. It doesn't really thrive. But back to your question about what technical decisions I would make is what we've seen over the last several years, especially with COVID accelerating it, is proliferation of software that targets SMB and SMB adopting lots of different point solutions. I mean, truly, we saw the proliferation of that. Before COVID, back in the GoDaddy days, we were still trying to convince small businesses to get a website and be online, right? And at the time, I mean, this was already 5-6 years ago, but like 50% of SMBs didn't have a website, right? So our job was to explain and teach and educate and help small businesses get a solution to go online. You take COVID and you fast forward it all, everybody wants to be online and everybody wants to have all kinds of technology solutions to help them run their business, because COVID showed to everyone how important, technology is in actually, having your business. But then what happened is, because of this proliferation, your tech stack becomes unmanageable and it doesn't talk to each other. And I think on average now the SMB has 7+ different tech solutions, but that's an average, right? You got SMBs that have 20, 30, and so on. It becomes unmanageable. And so for me, if I'm starting an SMB, I would really love to think about, and obviously I have a little bit of an advantage of understanding what tech stacks, but I would really like to think about what kind of solutions I can use that help me solve multiple jobs or that interact with other point solutions, so that together I can get my jobs done, not in a very disparate way. Because I think that's the challenge right now. Too many options, too many solutions implemented, none of them talk to each other, more inefficiencies introduced, different inefficiency than before, but still inefficiency. And then you're still not solving the overall need of the small businesses have, whether it's grow your business, run your business, or whatnot.
So in theory, I definitely agree with you. I guess if I want to ask a question, it's around, there are many different companies that have started in many different ways going after SMBs. So GoDaddy started with like a website first solution. Zen Business started with incorporation. House Call Pro started with, the CRM and like the operating system. Do any of these companies actually have that full suite that is world-class across the board? Or do you think that they should go out and start making acquisitions and cobbling this stuff together?
Well, there's also another option. Third option is partnering or enabling easier, again, that hooking or interoperability. So for example, at Bill, we've announced, 6 months ago now, a partnership with Xero, right? So that way you can come to Bill for your financial operations automation solution, or you can be in Xero and discover financial operations workflows that are powered by Bill, right? So it doesn't have to be, your two options that you mentioned are great. You can build, you can acquire, but you can also figure out how to really embed in a way that is, you basically find the customer where they are at, instead of having the customer search for your solution independently.
I think that is the future of the next 5 years for sure. I mean, for one, it costs a lot of money to acquire SMBs. And if Bill or GoDaddy or Typeform have figured out ways to get into SMBs and you can now tap into that distribution channel, CAC should be significantly less. And we've seen it here. We have a portfolio company that's partnered with some platforms. And 3 months ago, they had 0% inbound leads. Now they're north of 50% inbound leads. And it's a win-win, because for a company like Bill, now maybe you can add an extra 20% of average revenue per customer, where without that partner, they might not actually get that.
Yeah, and it's a huge win for the customer. Again, back to, if your software is built in the right way where the customer continues to discover what more they can do with you, then it's that much easier to then discover the partners you bring to the table or integrated solutions you provide because you've partnered with someone else.
I want to talk about attach rates then for a second. Have you seen strong attach rates across new product lines when you've partnered with people or, helped done, co-op marketing, et cetera?
So I think, again, I think it depends on how well you partner. So I'll give you an example at GoDaddy. One of the things I led at GoDaddy is a partnership with Microsoft. Well, we were embedding Microsoft, and we were then the partner that was selling Microsoft. We could have embedded the standalone Microsoft Office 365 suite solution, or we came to Microsoft and said, we serve SMBs. We know how to serve them. Our SMBs, when you think of Microsoft, like for them SMBs, I think 10 plus employees or 15 plus or something like that. For GoDaddy, it was one employee or no employee. And so we came to Microsoft and we outlined how we believe SMBs should be served in the product that we want to offer from Microsoft. And we work with Microsoft to define the right experience so that we didn't just take off the shelf Office 365 solution. We took it in a way that we owned that onboarding experience, back to that PLG, very self-serve, very instantaneous experience. We've owned the product management of how the customer discovers the product, and then Microsoft provided the product. And that became one of the most successful partnerships and fastest growing for Microsoft. So again, I think it really depends on how you approach the partnership to then drive your success rates. If this was just here's your $5 discount code, go sign up with Microsoft, wouldn't have gone anywhere, right?
Yeah.
But it would have been a nice way to experiment initially, but it wouldn't have gone far, right? We knew as GoDaddy that we were serving such unique customer base, because SMB is broad, right? We say SMB, but it's such a range. We knew we were serving such smaller customers, and we knew them. We knew the customer and the experience they needed, but we also knew we needed the powerful product like what Office 365 had to offer. And so it was the combination of those two that then make that partnership successful. So I think. But by the way, also wasn't a success just overnight, right? It took building, launching, experimenting. It's still something the teams continue to work on. So it's not a one and done. It's not an instant thing. It's an investment in a strategic partnership that then you keep continuing to iterate on.
And from what you've seen, how much does the when matter in this? Meaning, when you market the new product to someone, if they've already been using something like GoDaddy for 5 years versus they're just getting onboarded, does that impact the attach rate dramatically?
Yeah, we've experienced it a lot with that, right? So do you attach something to the customer who just comes through the door? So GoDaddy's at the time, front doors were domains and websites. Or do you try to sell later? It's a tricky balance because you don't want to overwhelm the customer up front, and you want to make sure they complete certain tasks and get going with your product early on. If we just cross-sold them everything at once, then they would never build a website, for example, or set up their email or whatnot. You also don't want to go too far out where they're sort of running and they never want to talk to you again. So I think it's a tricky balance. I mean, the other way we kind of balance it is you look for signals. So for example, when we host the websites, we see what's on that website, and we see there's a Gmail address there versus a domain-based email address. So that's when you sort of present an offer, for example. So it really depends. Again, it goes back to experimentation and knowing your customer, and knowing that what is it that customer can do at once, how easy it is to do it once. Because again, for example, for us, if you came to buy a website and we cross-sold you 2 other things and you never build a website, that's not a success either, right? Then all those products will get canceled over time also. So it's that finding that the right balance and that right time and that right hook again.
Yeah, and when talking about experimentation, I feel like you have a very clear mental model on a lot of this stuff. Are there any frameworks that you've tried to bring from one company to the other when it comes to experimentation and product management?
Yeah. I think for me, the mindset around experimentation and what I try to tell the teams is that no one person, for the most part, is going to break a company, right? Like, what's the fear? What's the fear of trying something, learning, failing? Like, yeah, there's certain guardrails, but again, chances are no one person is going to really break the company by trying something new, different, and really exploring what they can do and what's possible. So for me, that mindset of let's experiment, let's celebrate successes, let's celebrate failures. If we don't fail enough, we're not experimenting enough. Kind of ask for forgiveness in that scope is is an important one, and truly following through and celebrating successes and failures is quite important. Of course, there's sort of a framework I try to use around, again, when you write up an experiment or think of an experience, is who's the customer, what's the problem, what's the hypothesis, what is it that you're testing, how are you going to measure the test result, how long will it take, and then one of the most important things that get often forgotten is what's going to happen next, right? I hate when tests run indefinitely. I hate when it's indecisive. It's got to have a conclusion. You either shut it down or you roll it out. And so that's like a pretty simple framework, but I want to make sure that teams follow, because then it's consistent and it forces you to think through all the steps. And every step is important. You really can't skip the hypothesis or how you measure the results or what's next. And so those are some of the frameworks I use, but for the most part, it's always the implementing of the framework is not the hard part. It's the mindset, right? It's the mindset of this can be an experiment. Everything can be a test. And that it's okay to do it often, and it's okay to both succeed and fail. And
so how many tests are you usually running simultaneously?
It's a good question. I'm not sure if I have the exact number, but it really, I mean, I can give you a number, I can say 30, 40, but it probably won't mean anything until you know the size of the team and so on. But I think, again, it's more around, can everything be a test? Right? It's why wouldn't something be a test? And then from that point on, then it's just the velocity of your teams.
And I want you to bring me behind the scenes for a second. So we'll call it the follow home, I think you called it earlier.
Follow me home, yeah.
Follow me home. You know, I follow you into a meeting that you're running with your product team. How are you trying to get those ideas out of people? And more specifically, how do you try to prioritize which tests to run and decide which ones you're not going to run?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, hopefully I'm not the one prioritizing which ones we're running, or I have the wrong team, right? So again, to be honest, I try to build a team, the one that I can learn from everybody on the team, right? Everybody can operate independently, think for their teams, represent their teams, and so on, and make sure that they have that runway. What we do agree on is the product leadership team is just overall priorities for the business, for the, let's say it's for the year, for the yearly planning. Here's our priorities, here's the goals that we need to achieve, here's the results we're looking for across the year. And then I look to my teams to figure out how many ways can we break that down, what do we know we want to build and launch, right? What do we want to, and even when you know what you want to build and launch, you still want to experiment of how it shows up, but at least you know what you're trying to build versus what are the areas we want to experiment about because we're thinking we want to build this, or we're thinking we want to invest in that. I think going back to what I said earlier, one of the reasons I went into product management is because I find product management to be a perfect training ground for being that CEO of a company, because you have to think end to end. So when I look at my product leadership team, I want everybody on the team to think like the CEO of their area, and therefore think of ways, again, how to build things, where to innovate, what's the right thing to test, and so on. So for us, the discussion is primarily around our priorities, right? Like, are we doing the right things? Are we investing in the right areas? Where are we underinvested? And then the teams can then set the strategy for their teams and so on, and sort of you keep empowering at every level.
Are there any simple frameworks that when someone walks in the door, I know you mentioned some, but if I were to work for you tomorrow, what's the first framework you would want to teach me around product management?
Well, a couple things. Again, for me, having a sort of that vision, mission, strategy in place is really important. So if that doesn't exist, we're going to start there, because it's something that binds all the teams together and brings all the teams together. The next one from there is our investment horizons, right? So are we, if we have the strategy, are we investing enough for today, tomorrow, and the future? And by the way, that investment horizon works whether you're a product leader or a market leader. I used the exact same framework when I was in EMEA and thinking about geographies, which geography is going to return in 3 to 5 years, 1 to 3 years, which one's paying my bills today. And so again, we start there. Then we talk about some of the testing framework and framing everything is that what's the customer problem, what's the hypothesis, and so on. The other thing we have to do, again, makes more sense for the larger teams especially, is what is your product development life cycle, right? Like, how do you make sure everybody is on the same page when you start small and you kind of all grow up together in the same company, you all think the same way. When you're a larger company and you've done some acquisitions, everybody has their own framework. And so how do you align on on that right framework? Actually, Intuit does that really well, because when you're at Intuit, you know exactly what frameworks to follow. And then the other thing I would say, last thing I would say, is like you align the tools as well. The other thing I notice, again, when you start small, you implement a tool that everybody uses, and we're off and running. When you, again, come into a larger company and people come from different companies or through acquisitions, then you've got like kind of just like SMB does, your tech stack explodes, and then you can't even have a single source of truth for your roadmaps. And so those are some of the kind of frameworks I would say. Just start think about if those are in place already when you come in. That's something you want to build, and when, because you're not going to build it all at once either. So kind of that's where we get started.
I want to touch on something you just mentioned, which is like you get to a place and there's a culture already in place. Oftentimes, founders are the ones in the earliest days who are owning product. You've gone into multiple companies now, become chief product officer. You're also a board member. We're a board member at Sage. What advice would you give a chief product officer going into a company where the product historically has been owned by the founder and CEO?
Yeah. What I found with the founders, and I had a chance to work with two companies, so Typeform and Bill, where the founders were still very much present at the company. And of course, in Bill's case, the founder is the CEO as well. There's kind of two things that I find about the founders is that on one hand, they're the visionaries, right? They had the vision to create this company. They had the vision that there's a need. And while they've started in a certain place, there's always a vision. There's always a vision 5-10 years out that they had in mind, right? They didn't just start the company to solve this one thing or that first workflow that got launched. They started a company because there was this bigger vision. So definitely visionaries. And so working with them to make sure you understand that vision, you understand how they think about the world, because it is unique. So that's one thing. On the other hand, they're also the most advanced users of your product. Right? Because again, it's their baby, right? They started with that product from when that product had, one feature, right? When that product didn't even know how to talk or walk or whatever, they truly were with the product from the beginning throughout the entire journey. So no matter when you come in or how much you use the product, you're probably never going to be as close to it as they are because they've seen it from the beginning. And so you've got these folks who are like, on one hand, visionaries, on the other hand, the most advanced users of your product. And so the conversations I found alternate between how can we improve every single page and experience on this page, but at the same time, how do we think about 10 years from now, right? In that range. And I feel like as a CPO, you fill in that middle, right? In terms of, yes, you need to make sure you're continuously improving the product from what it is today. You build a strategy to bridge the next 3 to 5 years, and you make sure you're on that path, but always keeping in mind that sort of bigger vision. So I kind of feel as a CPO, you slot
in the middle,
right there in the middle.
So the founder's really starting with the what, you're helping determine the how. But in some ways, I feel like this whole conversation about founder mode is giving a lot of founders the idea of like they can go in and figure out what should be that specific test they want to like alter. Do you see that happening?
I do, but I think there's again that fine balance of being careful that you might be the most advanced user of your product. You're not the only user, and you might not even be the target audience. Right. So I think with the founders, and I've always appreciated actually with the founder of Bill and the CEO of Bill, is that there's always that respect of, as a CPO, I came in to make sure that my team understands, again, that 3 to 5 year product strategy, or has one, understands the customer, and we build for that customer. You can, especially when you serve SMBs, you can never over-index for one customer, right? You have to make sure you're solving the needs of your customer base. And so again, it's that fine balance of how do you make sure you continue to improve the day-to-day of the product and make sure that your boss and founder are happy, but at the same time, you're not solving for one customer. You're solving for this broader audience. And then in terms of filling in the how, I'm not sure if it's just the how, because again, to me, it's the time horizon. The vision is 5 to 10 years out. Your product strategy is probably 3 to 5 years. So it's still the what to get to that vision, is just on a different time horizon.
It's like the more micro what's versus the broader like what, kind of going out into the future.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears about AI for a minute. What are your thoughts around the role AI will play in SMBs in the future?
AI is an interesting one and very exciting one, because when you ask SMBs if they want AI or they believe they need AI in their business, and we've asked and we've done a survey, overwhelming percentage of them, something like 80+% say yes. But then what does that really mean?
Do they know what it is?
Exactly. What does it really mean? So to me, when I think about AI and when it comes to serving SMBs, it goes back to, again, what is it that you're solving for them, and how can you use an exciting technology like AI, or frankly, how have you been already using it for the most likely, and continue to use it and use all the latest iterations of it to serve that customer better? Like, how is it that your product is becoming more intuitive, more sort of efficient for that customer, more easy to use, are there ways you can interact with that customer that's more human-like, but through a product, through a technology? That's how AI should show up for SMB. And in fact, SMB shouldn't even know that they're using AI, right? Like, I mean, they should, we'll tell them that, of course, but it shouldn't be about this product has AI versus this one doesn't. That probably won't even exist. It's more around, this product saves me so much time. This product saves me so much money. This product is so easy to use. That is why I chose that product. And that is all possible because of the technology underneath it that's powered by AI or Gen AI.
You said something to me before we started recording, which is that SMBs are more likely to spend more money on services than products. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how services can be replaced by AI in the future. Do you have a point of view around how SMBs might think about paying for an AI marketing agency or other services versus the software?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the reason why I said that SMBs are more willing to pay for services, again, it goes back to that subject matter expertise and skill set and having a safety net. As an SMB owner, for example, they would be more willing to trust somebody to do the work versus that they did it right through technology. And I can give you a really quick example, which was so memorable and a little bit heartbreaking. I remember we visited, it was with GoDaddy. I visited a customer in California in Half Moon Bay, and it was this store that sold kids' clothes. And this owner, she was telling us how this has been her life. But as, Amazons of the world are, growing, and again, at that time, more people come into her store, take pictures, go buy online. And so her business was dwindling and dwindling, and she was thinking about how it's going to shut down soon because there's just not enough revenue. So then we talked to her about, again, what services, like what cost does she have in running her business, aside from the obvious, the store and so on. And she says software-wise, she barely spends anything. I think maybe she had a domain, maybe even a website. But then she says she pays something like, was it $1,000 a month for her? I remember she said her IT girl. And I'm like, well, what does your IT girl do? And when she described it, we all stood there saying like, oh my gosh, like that GoDaddy products do that for a fraction of the cost. You don't need this person. And you're talking about how you're trying to prolong the life of your business every month possible. And you're paying so much money, relatively speaking, for something that the technology already does, but you just don't trust that you can that you're doing it right, right? And so that's why, again, services there's this high willingness to pay because there's certain association of a safety net or a safety factor. I didn't do it right, but they're going to do it right. They know what they're doing. And so I think back to your question, I think, again, the more the interaction with technology becomes more intuitive and feels more like I can ask a human question. I don't have to doubt myself if I ask the right question in order to get the right answer. Or the more that interaction becomes, again, more intuitive in terms of how I think about the business. I as a business owner, I think the more you should give confidence to that business owner that the products are good enough and you don't need necessarily the services, because the services are really a wrapper.
Yeah.
Again, another example, and during my time at GoDaddy, we had, you can do it yourself website builder, or we can build one for you. Well, guess what? With AI, you really don't need somebody to build it for you. You can articulate what you want, and the website gets built. And so it eliminates that need for expensive services, which I think is amazing.
I do wonder if that's a user experience and like a psychology issue where even if you could use AI to build the website yourself, maybe you want the perception that there is a human on the other end, even if the GoDaddy,
Yeah.
website builder person is able to handle 10,000 clients now versus like
Yeah.
100. And maybe if the branding and positioning that these companies need to go is a human angle, but powered by AI and mainly AI.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a transition, right? It's not going to happen. It's not going to be that overnight trust. And I think what you're bringing up is that transition will probably initially mean that the cost of doing the service is cheaper, and maybe you can pass that saving on to the customer as well. And over time, it becomes more self-serviceable.
Totally.
So I agree. I think it's going to be a transition.
There's like a hotly debated topic right now about whether or not AI is going to create an opportunity for startups. I like to ask every guest I have one question, but normally we talk about New York, and there's a lot of news right now, at least when we're recording this, around the mayor of New York. If you were to take over as mayor of San Francisco tomorrow, what's something that you would change?
That is one tough job. And all the respect to the mayors of San Francisco, the current, the before and after. San Francisco is going through a really challenging time. And it was very stark to see it because we left the Bay Area before COVID and we came back after from our assignment abroad. And it's just it's a different world that we came back to. And I think the world where, obviously, the challenge. You probably heard all the challenges about San Francisco, about the homelessness problem, the drug problem, but it also gets exacerbated by the fact that the businesses aren't really back to full capacity, right? In terms of working from home, working remote, and that creates sort of that downward spiral as well for all of the businesses that serve the businesses,
Yeah.
and so on, right? It's a sort of that spiral downwards, and so I think the challenge is, I think, for running San Francisco is, again, how do you reset the city that's on one hand the most innovative? It still hosts some of the most innovative, advanced companies. It's a city where Waymo, Waymo rides are more common now than human-driven
Yeah.
shared rides, right? And yet they drive by all of that homelessness and so on. Like the dichotomy of the city is so stark. And so how do you reengage every single everything in your power, everything in the power of the government to really help manage the city, like manage it as how I would think about managing a business that has something that's so spectacular and still draws everybody to come to San Francisco Bay Area because of its innovation, and at the same time so failing.
I really don't know if everybody realizes the impact, the negative impacts. There are plenty of positive, but there's a lot of negative impacts of working from home, and the impacts it's having on cities, local small businesses, growth of employees who are fresh out of college, our psychological minds, and connection to other humans, and the amount of trust we can build. It's certainly creating new challenges that I think we'll look back 10 years from now and be interesting to see if the pros will ultimately outweigh the cons.
Yeah, obviously it's a heated debate, and I do believe that what the companies have learned during COVID is how to enable flexibility for the workforce, and I think that's powerful. It's something that before was looked down on or thought of as impossible, and certain jobs can be done at home and so on, and COVID taught everyone a lesson. So I think the flexibility that we've all learned as employees and as businesses during COVID, I think is so powerful, and I want to make sure we never forget that. But I also do agree with you that I used to go in the office every day, right? Because it's the way to interact. It's the way to have some kind of a human connection. It's the way to learn, right? You can learn from everyone in the office just through a conversation, versus sitting alone at home. So I completely agree with you. And you see this in San Francisco. You see how many thriving SMBs there were supporting all of the big corporations that were there because they were employees that needed to eat, that needed services, and so on. And it's a ghost town now. So it's definitely very visible.
Well, I appreciate you coming in. I'm excited to see what you do next in your career, and look forward to continuing to build this relationship. So thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.